Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new Genshin Theory video. Today, I'd like to talk about an idea that I've had for a while now concerning Istaroth, the god of time. I believe that there are multiple different versions of her that exist at once. So, in this video, I'll explain exactly what I mean and who these versions of her could be. With that said, let's jump right in. This theory is one I've been working on for a long time in the background. I have a ton of notes connecting Istaroth to various other characters, using inspirations not only from the game itself, but also from real-world information and legends. So, I think it's safe to say this is going to be a long one, and that parts of it might be a bit more outlandish than others. Before I dive in though, I'd like to start off by talking about Istaroth herself, and what we know about her. Istaroth is one of the 4 shades of the Primordial One, being the Shade of Time. She is known by a great many titles, including Master of Time, Ruler of Time, God of Moments, Kairos, the Thousand Winds of Time, the Undying Wind, and Tokoyo Okami. She had a presence in Mondstadt, being worshipped alongside the Anemo Archon Barbatos at the Thousand Winds Temple, located on the eastern side of the region. However, due to the Lawrence clan suppressing knowledge during the aristocracy and the burning of Mondstadt's library, she was ironically forgotten over time in this region. Evidence of her presence here is given through the Sacrificial Weapon series, the Cecilias which grow around the temple, and the sundials located in the temple and on the Nameless Island east of the region. The sundial in the temple is also surrounded by a group of hilichurls, who may be worshipping Istaroth, referencing the unified civilization of Teyvat that existed before the second who came arrived. Historian Jacob Musk also believes that the hilichurls worship elemental power itself, saying how they worship the power of Anemo rather than the Anemo Archon. With Istaroth being tied heavily to wind, this would further support the idea that these hilichurls could be worshipping the god of time, or maybe just the element itself, as he said. Additionally, while it isn't exactly clear, she may have also had a presence in Salvandagnir, which is today known as Dragonspine. Roald the Adventurer tells in one of his diaries that a fairy tale had said that the Wind of Time had abandoned the mountain in its moment of destruction. This moment of destruction is when the Skyfrost nail fell onto the mountain, freezing it over, which I'll talk more about in my Blizzard Strayer video later this week. There is also the song Ad Oblivion, which plays in Dragonspine. The Ad Oblivion is something that is also mentioned by the Aranaga during the final chapter of the Agnohotra Sutra World Quest. He says the following: "Yes, the wind that flows forever, the 1,000 winds that return to one. But on earth is the stream, and the ubiquitous is the wind, everlasting, devastating." This line can be interpreted to be about Istaroth and her ubiquitous presence throughout the entirety of Teyvat. Istaroth also had a presence in Enkanomiya after it fell beneath the surface during the war between the Primordial One and the Second Who Came. The pleas and prayers of the people went unanswered by the Primordial One and 3 of the 4 shades, with Istaroth being the only shade to respond. Scribes then dedicated themselves to recording history and the passage of time beneath the surface, calling themselves Scribes of Tokoyo Okami. Out of reverence, the people tended to call her either Kairos or Tokoyo Okami, refusing to say her true, secret name, and only writing it backwards in the rare event they used it. Istaroth's power of Undying Wind was also recognized as one of the main elements of Enkanomiya, with the other being the water of the baptismal bishops. Eventually though, after Orobashi came to rule over the people and became their god, Istaroth was once again forgotten by the people who once worshipped her. In Inazuma, during the second act of Raiden Shogun's story quest, we traveled into Raiden Makoto's realm of consciousness. While on the outside only a few minutes had passed, 500 years had passed on the inside. This, along with planting the seed that eventually grew into the sacred Sakura, led Raiden A to believe that Istaroth had some sort of influence over this realm of consciousness as well. With all that said, I'd like to get into the theorizing now. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I believe that the God of Time exists in multiple instances across Teyvat. I originally thought of this while thinking about her title as the Thousand Winds of Time, and how Venti was a wisp amongst the Thousand Winds who rose to godhood. I'll go more in depth about Venti later, but for now I'd like to explain what I mean by these instances. I believe simply that Istaroth is in multiple places at once. Each wisp of the Thousand Winds is, in essence, a piece of her that travels across Teyvat, keeping track of every event and keeping watch over every person and creature. This claim is also supported by the statue of the omnipresent god located in Inazuma City. It is widely believed that this statue represents Istaroth, a theory that I agree with. The statue is described as representing a god with 100 eyes, and combining this with the meaning of omnipresent, I've taken this to mean that Istaroth literally has eyes everywhere. With this theory, I also believe that the voice at the end of version 3.3's interlude Archon quest belongs to Istaroth as well. When Scaramouche attempted to erase himself from the world via Irminsul, everyone, including him, forgot who he was. However, the past was not changed, just the people's memories of it. The events of the past still happened, and time was not altered. This means that time would remember what really happened, and as the god of time, so would Istaroth. Additionally, during the world quest Time and Wind, we heard another mysterious voice while fighting an Eye of the Storm, and this voice could have belonged to Istaroth as well. Getting back to these instances, however, I'd like to clarify that while these instances may be pieces of the god of time, they could still be their own being. They may have started out almost identical to one another, but over time gained their own personalities and such. So the instances aren't going to be identical in every way. You can think of these instances as similar to the segments of the Doctor, but instead of being different versions of one person at different ages, they are more like separate people who all originated from Istaroth, sort of like her children in a way. There would still be a prime Istaroth, most likely being the one represented by the statue of the omnipresent god, and all her instances would be represented by the eyes on the statue. This prime Istaroth would also be the one who spoke to us at the end of the interlude Archon quest I mentioned earlier. Basically, the instances are vessels that she can see through, but who still have their own personalities and everything like that. They observe the world from different perspectives, and while they might not be as powerful as Istaroth, they may still possess some of her abilities, albeit in weaker forms. With that said though, I'd like to discuss the first candidates I have for being instances, those being the three Moon Sisters, Arya, Sonnet, and Canon. The Moon Sisters are thousands of years old, being even older than Morax. They dwelled in the Lunar Palace, and rode through the heavens in a silver carriage. The three were also in love with the morning stars, and that love was equal to the affection between the sisters. 3 times a month, the sisters would switch places in holding sovereignty, representing the phases of the moon. Eventually though, when they failed to do this, a calamity overturned the heavens and earth, and in the end, the sisters turned on each other, resulting in their mutual deaths. The moon in the night sky of Teyvat is said to be one of their corpses. The calamity that occurred was also the result of the union between a Seelie ancestor and an Outlander, which was hosted in the Lunar Palace. The two were eventually separated for eternity, and their memories were wiped. The disaster is also what turned the Seelie from their once noble forms to the wispy husks that exist today. Of course, I can't mention the Moon Sisters without also mentioning the blessing of the Welkin Moon. Interestingly, the hairstyle of the figure represented in the blessing of the Welkin Moon is almost exactly the same as the hairstyle found on the statue of the omnipresent god in Inazuma. That's just one thing though, not enough to prove a connection. So, let's look at the real-life inspiration behind Istaroth, that being Astaroth from the Ars Goetia. The name Astaroth comes from the Canaanite goddess Astarte, and to get to the name Istaroth, it was likely combined with the Mesopotamian goddess who was equivalent to Astarte, Ishtar. In ancient Mesopotamia, Ishtar was known as the Queen of Heaven and was associated with the planet Venus. Interestingly, Venus has also been called the morning star, and the Moon Sisters were in love with the morning stars. Furthermore, Ishtar was the sister of Ereshkigal, whose Greek equivalent was Hecate. Now, Hecate was a goddess of the moon, like the Moon Sisters. More interestingly, however, is that Hecate was often portrayed as having 3 forms or being triple-bodied. This makes me believe that the Moon Sisters definitely have some sort of relation to the god of time, and could even be instances of her. Additionally, Hecate is often associated with another moon goddess, Selene, which does sound similar to the Celes. She was also associated with Artemis, who among her many titles was also the goddess of sudden death, which could refer to the sudden calamity that caused the Moon Sisters' mutual deaths. Speaking of the Celes though, I'd now like to talk about a likely survivor of their race, that being the Goddess of Flowers, otherwise known as Nabu Malikata. She was one of the 3 god kings of Sumeru, alongside the previous Dendro Archon, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, and King Deshret. She was also the mother of the Jinn, a race who have many similarities to the Celes. Additionally, she was alive during the time when the second who came arrived in Teyvat, and was eventually cast aside by the heavens, along with the rest of her kin, becoming stripped of their minds and only remaining as husks of their former selves. However, she was able to maintain her form, wandering the barren wastes of the desert for 72 days. During this time, Nilopala lotuses would bloom beneath her feet. These flowers are representative of the moon, which would connect the goddess of flowers to the Moon Sisters, and thus Istaroth as well. The goddess of flowers also gave rise to the Padisara flowers. Both of these flowers then tie back into the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar, with one of her symbols being a rosette, or a stylized flower design. Additionally, another symbol of Ishtar was the Star of Ishtar, which is used in Genshin to represent King Deshret, who was in love with Nabu Malikata. Now, the Goddess of Flowers also warned King Deshret against searching for the Master of the Four Shades, that being the primordial one, meaning she does have some knowledge about them. Additionally, she knows about the divine nails and the calamities that they caused. King Deshret, however, remained set on his goal, and so she assisted him in it, very well knowing that she would die. Moving back to Ishtar and her symbolism, however, we can look at a character who wears an outfit inspired by that worn by the Goddess of Flowers, that being Nilou. Nilou wears a crown with horns, much like how Ishtar had a similar crown with horns. Their dresses are also similar, flowing down out the back, while still having the legs visible at the front. The fact that the Goddess of Flowers shares so many similarities with Ishtar and is heavily associated with the moon really makes me believe that she may be an instance of Istaroth as well. If you want to hear more about the Goddess of Flowers and Istaroth though, I recommend Ashkai's video on the subject, which is linked below. Now, I'd like to talk about the character who is most often associated with Istaroth. That, of course, being the Anemo Archon Barbatos. He was once a wisp of the Thousand Winds, a tiny elemental spirit. However, through the faith of the people of Old Mondstadt during their rebellion against Decarabian, he rose to godhood and became Barbatos, the Anemo Archon. After this, he would use his new power to terraform the land of Mondstadt and guide the people in building a new city in the middle of Cider Lake, creating Mondstadt as it is today. These days, he doesn't rule directly over his people, opting for them to have freedom instead. He still will descend onto Mondstadt if this freedom is threatened, however. Due to this absence, he is supposedly the least powerful among the 7 Archons. yet the people of Mondstadt still adore and worship him. In the time of the game, he has been wandering the world in the form of the bard Venti, who knows every song past, present, and future. He is mostly seen in or around the city of Mondstadt, of course. As for his relation to Istaroth, I'd like to start by mentioning his origin as a wisp among the Thousand Winds. The Thousand Winds is a title associated with the god of time, both by the people of Enkanomiya and from the name of the Thousand Winds Temple. To have Venti be a wisp of the Thousand Winds would imply a connection between the two gods. There is also the matter of their statues. They seem to be made of the same material and share many aspects in their design styles. This could mean that the statue of Istaroth was once located in Mondstadt, perhaps in the Thousand Winds Temple, and for some reason was transported to Inazuma at one point. The statues also share similar features. They both wear long robes that have a hood, both have a pair of wings, and they both have an object that hangs down from their neck. The hairstyles are also similar in a way, having two strands hanging in the front on either side. Venti's are braided, while Istaroth's are not. Venti's statue is standing with his hands outstretched, perhaps symbolizing his gift of freedom to his people, and that he sometimes walks among them. Istaroth's statue, on the other hand, is sitting on a pillar with her hands on her lap, perhaps symbolizing how she tends to sit back and observe from above, with the eyes on her wings representing each of her instances, as I said before. Venti also has power over memories, as he was able to show Razor a memory of his parents, despite said memory occurring before Razor was even born. With true memories being linked with time, it helps connect Venti to Istaroth even more. It also gives credit to my theory earlier about how the instances of Istaroth may possess parts of her power. There is also, once again, the symbolism of flowers and rosettes, connecting back to the goddess Ishtar. For Venti, he has Cecilia's all over his design. His hat and lyre are adorned with the flower, and his splash art features them quite prominently, with him floating above a field of them. Cecilia's, of course, are also representative of the god of time, which further connects the two. Out of all the characters in this video, Venti is the one who has the most connections to Istaroth so far, mainly due to the fact that we know more about him than any other character in this video. Now then, I'd like to talk about none other than the third of the 11 Fatui Harbingers, Columbina. Columbina is quite a mysterious character, with many theories surrounding her. Many believe she may be related to or even be a Seelie, which I can see being true as well. The mask she wears bears quite a resemblance to the pattern seen on the bottom of a Seelie court, and the color of her skin is a pale white, almost like the moon. As for her hair, it also seems to go down in a similar way to Istaroth's, being two strands hanging in front on either side. Additionally, she is wearing a bow tie, much like Venti's. She also wears a headpiece that has angel wings on the back, and Istaroth or characters related to her have been portrayed with wings before, as has the goddess Ishtar. Speaking of Ishtar, one of her symbols was the dove, which also happens to be related to Columbina. Her name means little dove, and as such, her constellation is also very much likely the crying dove. One other bit is that her eyes are closed in a winter night's lazo, much like the statues of Istaroth and Venti. Her eyes being closed might symbolize her trying to detach herself from Istaroth, not allowing the god of time to see through her eyes anymore. This would line up with the Fatui's goal of rebelling against the divine, and would make Columbina all the more terrifying. If she holds the third seat of the Harbingers, despite attempting to block out the god of time, it's rather frightening to think of what she could do. One other thing about her is that Tartaglia warns us that something just doesn't feel right about her, and Wanderer tells us, with our conscience, to stay away from her. Perhaps Columbina has some sort of power over conscious, or even memories, which have been linked to Istaroth before. Instead of showing memories from the past like Venti though, she could create false memories, which could make her opponent go insane. Nahida also informs us that the top rank harbingers, up to number 3, have power rivaling that of gods. Columbina being an instance of Istaroth would help explain why she is this high in the ranks of the harbingers, and why she seems so mysterious, even compared to the other harbingers we don't know much about. I'll definitely have a separate video on her at some point, likely closer to Fontaine. The next character I'd like to talk about is none other than Guizhong, the goddess of dust. Guizhong is quite an old god, and according to what we learn alongside Soraya, she is very likely older than Morax, like the Moon Sisters were. There has been quite a bit of speculation about her since we first saw her in version 3.4's Lantern Rite, including how she may very well be a Seelie. She also created the Memory of Dust, which holds all of her knowledge. Memories, of course, have been linked to Istaroth, and the knowledge within the mechanism may be something that is unknown to most of Teyvat, or something that was erased from Irminsul. If Istaroth was the voice at the end of the version 3.3 interlude Archon quest, it would make sense that someone related to her could also possess the ability to know things beyond Irminsul. Her appearance is also somewhat similar to Istaroth's, with the 2 strands of hair on either side of her face, and she also has long flowing robes, mainly her sleeves. She also is associated with glaze lilies, which are said to transform the memories of the land into its fragrance during their fluorescence. There's another link to memories there, and the flowers are also similar to Nilopala lotuses, which are likely related to the god of time, as they are a symbol of the goddess of flowers. Guizhong also has stylized flowers on her design, similar to a rosette, which of course is a symbol of the goddess Ishtar. There has been a link to Istaroth in every other region released so far, and I think that Guizhong may be the link to her in Liyue. While there aren't as many links to her as some of the others, I still thought it was important to mention her. Anyways, let's get on to the next character now. Of course, if I'm talking about the god of time, I have to mention the Tortoise of Time. The Tortoise of Time was mentioned by Nahida in her voice line about Faruzan, where she said that her situation is like, the great Tortoise of Time accidentally threw her off its back and left her suspended in the past. Many of you pointed out to me in the comments of my Sumeru Weekly Boss Predictions video that the giant tortoise seen in Nahida's trailer may very well be the Tortoise of Time. This great tortoise may very well have also been a metaphor, but either way, I'd like to talk about it here. First off, this great tortoise would be connected to Istaroth solely due to the shared dominion of time. I also think that it may be representative of the black tortoise of the Chinese 4 symbols. The black tortoise, or black warrior, is portrayed as a tortoise with a snake on its back. In ancient China, both the tortoise and the serpent were creatures that symbolized longevity, furthering the connection to the god of time. Additionally, the Black Warrior also represented midnight, which could tie back to the Moon Sisters, and water, which could tie back to the goddess of flowers, with her being represented by Nilu, a Hydrovision user. Adding on to this, the Black Tortoise was also represented by the god Yu Shi. Yu Shi had close associations with Feng Bo, the god of wind, and the Agong, the god of thunder. This could show the relation of Istaroth to Venti, as well as her help in Inazuma with Raiden Makoto and the Sacred Sakura. I could even go as far as to connect this back to Sheisha, who I mentioned in the Sumeru Weekly Bosses prediction video. Sheisha is a snake, which of course is also part of the Black Warrior symbolism. It is said that when Sheisha uncoils, time moves forward and creation takes place, and that when he coils back, the universe ceases to exist. His name also means he who remains, because even as the world is destroyed at the end of each kalpa, Sheisha remains as he is. All of this may then show that the Chinese 4 symbols may very well be part of the inspiration for the 4 shades and the primordial one as a whole. The Black Warrior would of course represent Istaroth in some way, and the others would represent the other three shades. All of that is theory talk for another video though, which I may touch on at some point in the future. Either way, the Great Tortoise of Time, if it isn't just a metaphor, definitely has some connection to Istaroth. For this final section, I want to talk about some characters who have some possible references and relations to Istaroth, but are most likely not one of her instances. First up are the two other God Kings of Sumeru, those of course being the previous Tendril Archon, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, and King Deshret. For Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, I wanted to mention her because of the Akasha system she put in place. In Genshin, the Akasha was a system that allowed people of Sumeru to access a database of any knowledge they wanted, so long as they had the proper clearance. The system is shut down as of the end of the Sumeru Archon quests though. However, there is an idea in real life known as the Akashic Records. While there is no evidence to suggest it is real, the records were said to be a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and more. The records held all of these, the past, present, and the future, from all different types of creatures. To me, this sounds very much like Irminsul in the ley lines, which of course makes sense in Sumeru. However, it also of course reminded me of Istaroth, and more specifically the Goddess of Flowers. Rukkhadevata was friends with the Goddess of Flowers, so perhaps she helped make the Akasha, and thus it had more knowledge about all events across the timeline than we were led to believe. Now, these two were also friends with King Deshret. He was also known as the Morning King, and longed for the past. This alone is not enough to link him to Istaroth, but something else is. That would be the fact that he created the Eternal Oasis, using both the power of the Divine Nail of Mount Damavand and his own power. The Eternal Oasis was built as a cemetery for the Goddess of Flowers, who we've already discussed as likely being an instance of Istaroth. As for how King Deshret created this place frozen in time, he could have either had some temporal abilities of his own, or more likely he was able to modify the Divine Nail to create the Oasis. There is one more character I'd like to mention who I also believe is not an instance of Istaroth, but I still wanted to talk about them. I mentioned her earlier, and this character is none other than Raiden Makoto. Like I said towards the beginning of this video, Istaroth likely had some sort of influence over Raiden Makoto's realm of consciousness in Raiden's second story quest. This could mean that Raiden Makoto knew Istaroth personally, although it is suggested that Raiden A did not. When the sacred Sakura suddenly appeared in Inazuma, everyone except for Raiden A believed it had always been there, likely meaning that Istaroth may have altered Irminsul to make these memories. Raiden A didn't get affected, and that was likely on purpose, as she would be the one who ended up planting it within the realm of consciousness, after which it would take root in Inazuma's past. However, this shows how Istaroth could potentially have the power to alter Irminsul itself, as mostly everyone believed the sacred Sakura was always there, which further shows evidence to the thought that she was most likely the voice at the end of the version 3.3 Interlude Archon quest. I know that Nahida and Wanderer both altered Irminsul and forgot about what they did, but Istaroth is one of the four shades, so it is likely that she'd be able to retain the knowledge of the true flow of events. With her also having power over memories and bearing witness to everything throughout time, she would naturally be immune to the memory-altering effects of Irminsul, or would at least be able to remember what really happened with relative ease. Out of the two sisters though, Raiden Makoto is more likely to be an instance of Istaroth, though I still very much doubt this. She was said to treasure every moment and the beauty that those moments brought. Each beautiful point in time and space was her idea of eternity, a world that changes, but still remains beautiful eternally. Again, I don't think either A or Makoto are an instance of Istaroth, and I feel the same about Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and King Deshret. I still wanted to mention them though, as these bits of information are likely important to figuring out the mystery behind the God of Time and the true power that she holds. This theory was a bit ambitious, but I think it came out well in the end. I was putting off making this video for so long because I couldn't articulate my ideas correctly or come up with a proper script, and I wasn't sure if it would come out good even if I was able to get all of that done in the end. However, I must say that I'm really happy with how this script turned out, and I really hope you all enjoyed the theory as well. To me, this theory always made some sort of sense. It was just a bit of a struggle to get it from my brain and into writing. I hope my thoughts were understandable and that you all enjoyed the video. There may be characters and details that I missed as well, so I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.